Okay, so thank you all for joining me on this meeting. What we will do tonight and what we will focus on is how to fill out the voter registration form. The voter registration form is, on the face of it, fairly straightforward, but in our experience over the years in working with folks to fill it out, a number of questions arise. And so what we felt it would be useful to do would be to create an annotated version of the form and then to walk through that annotated version. We will provide at the table where we are doing voter registration, there will be a binder that will contain, among other things, this annotated version of the voter registration guide that you see tonight. And the kinds of questions that you can expect to come up have to do with things like what should students do if they are planning to move outside of their hometown to go to college. So for example, if someone's been accepted at New Paltz, and what should they do about registering and what kind of an address should they use. So we're going to talk through some of those points. And my colleagues, Cora Miles, Diane Tavakman, and Barbara Shore will chime in at any point if there's something I missed. And because we're such a small group, I would encourage any of you who have questions about what you're seeing on the screen to interrupt me and ask a question about it before we go any further. So before I begin, are there any questions from anybody or comments or thoughts? Okay, good. And I don't know, for those of you who are comfortable with it, I think there's a way you can, you can raise your hand. So, you know, if I'm talking and you can't get my attention, then just raise your hand. All right, good. So what I will do is I'll start by sharing the screen. So what you see on the screen now is the New York State voter registration form. Can everybody see this? I mean, if you can't, just, you know, raise your hand or something. So the purpose of the voter registration form is, there are several purposes to the voter registration form. As it says up here in the on the left side of this, on this side of the form, you can register to vote in elections in New York State using this form, but you can also do other things. People can change their name or address on their voter registration. So for example, if someone moves from one town to another, then this voter registration form would be used to do that. If someone gets married and changes their name, then this form would be used to convey that information to the Board of Elections. One can also become a member of a political party or change party affiliations. So if someone, oftentimes what we see is that when students register, they choose not to register a party affiliation. And then especially in a state such as New York, in which the Democratic Party holds such sway, there are occasions on which a registered voter will decide that maybe it's important to be registered with a political party so that they can vote in the primaries. This is, and the only way, of course, you can do that in New York State is because we have what are called closed primaries. You have to change your party affiliation or your party membership. Also, and this is a recent change, individuals, students who are 16 or 17 years of age are now eligible to pre-register, which means that they may fill out one of these forms, and when they reach the age of 18, they're eligible to vote. And we encourage youngsters to do that for obvious reasons. So let's move on. first thing I want to point out to you here is that the Board of Elections would like us to have these forms printed or filled out in blue or black ink. You will receive, there will be blue pens at the table. So that should not be an issue. Now, obviously, the first step in this process is anybody who is intending to register to vote must be a US citizen. So as it says here, if they're checking yes, then they're eligible to register to vote. If they're a citizen, if they're not a citizen, they're not eligible to register to vote. This next section is important, section 2, because if you will be 18 years of age or older on or before election day, then they can answer, and they answer this yes, then they're eligible to vote. If not, they can still go ahead and register. They just will not be eligible to vote this year. So for example, if an individual is going to turn 18 years of age in December, then he or she will be eligible to register to vote, but may not vote this year. And similarly, if an individual is 16 or 17 years old, as it says in this item 2 here, they're eligible to pre-register. And as it notes here, are you at least 16 years of age, and understand that you must be 18 years of age on or before election day to vote, and that until you are 18 years of age at the time of such election, your registration will be marked as pending. Okay, and then of course, if they answer no to both of these questions, then you thank them very much and you encourage them to come back at a later date and register. This next item 3, is pretty straightforward. First name, last name. If the individuals use a suffix or a middle initial, they should enter that here. Item 4 is now there are 1, 2, 3, 4 items here. Only the first of these 4 items is required, and that is the birth date. Gender is optional, phone number is optional, and email is optional. I will say that, again, it's been pointed out to me that you might wish to encourage registrants to consider entering either their telephone number or their email address or both, because if there is a question or a problem with the form, the Board of Elections might choose to try to contact the registrant to clarify that. So a phone number or an email address, while not required, might be prudent. Yes, Cora.
So how do we answer when they ask, what is a suffix? What's the best way to say that to them?
I don't know. Are you a junior? Are you a third? Are you a senior? I mean, what's funny to me about that is
because somebody's going to ask, so I want
right.
to know,
and of course it will. I don't know. I'm not aware that women have ever been given suffixes that way. But I mean, certainly all the men have like junior, senior, the third, and that sort of thing. That's I think the best way to answer that. So moving on, the address where you live. Okay, so this is the home address, and I will point out that if individuals collect their emails at something like at a postal box, then they shouldn't be entering that here. The place where they go home to sleep is where they should is the address they should enter here. Now, this is a nuance, and it may come up, perhaps. We actually did have it come up during National Voter Registration Day, and that is if a homeless person comes to and wishes to register to vote, they are eligible to register to vote And a homeless person, an address for a homeless person is wherever that homeless person sleeps. So if the homeless person, and this is not a joke, if a homeless person sleeps at the park bench in the middle of the in the middle of Renaissance Plaza, then that homeless person should enter park bench, Renaissance Plaza, White Plains, New York. Okay, if they sleep under a bridge, they should enter that. That is a valid address in the eyes of the Board of Elections. Now, someone raised their hand, and that was Adrian. Adrian, did you have a question?
Hi, yes. I worked for the Department of Social Services, and I was in the homeless unit for several years. And just DSS in general, when some of the customers come in and fill out the temporary assistance applications, and there's the voter registration form on the back of it. Sometimes the homeless population, they move around a lot. And I know you mentioned, wherever they're currently living. So I'm not sure. What if is it the same if they're at a local shelter?
I would think so. I mean, and Barbara, I think, but Barbara, you're muted, but Barbara has an answer to that. Barbara, you're muted. If you,
She's
if
doing
you
it.
just, yeah, go ahead.
She's doing
I'm
it.
sorry. One of the resources in the binder is going to flesh this out a little, but it specifically says if someone has a relationship with a shelter, and the shelter would accept mail for them, they can use that address if that answers your question at all.
Okay, thank you.
And-
I know,
and
I know it's is it considered a legal document? Because I know with social services, if we send mail to a particular address and that person's no longer there, that mail is often returned to sender. So they will most likely not get any mail. They will never get any mail if they're no longer there. If it's something that came from Department of Social Services or Albany, anything related to their case, it's not forwarded. So I don't know how that works if mail happens to be forwarded, or if they have a forwarding order online or registered with the post office. Is anything forwarded from voter registration?
That's a good question.
Board of Elections?
That's a good question. I to the best of my knowledge, the material that the Board of Elections sends out is prior to each election, they're required to send information informing each voter of their what their election district is, what their assembly and senate and so on and so all the districts are, and where their local polling place is. Honestly, I don't know what happens if that mail is undeliverable, which is what you're asking. And so, I think probably let me look into that, Adrian, and I'll get back to you, because it's an important question, and it's one that I want to make sure that that we get straight.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna take 1 minute here and do something.
Do you mind if I just piggyback very quickly on what?
Sure, certainly, go right ahead, please.
Similar to Ms. Adair, I'm a probation officer, so we have similar situation as what she described. Sometimes we are able to get, on some occasions, a family member, a family friend. Would that address be able to be used? Like, someone could be homeless but still have a mom, right? And the mom has an address, or no?
Okay, I would think that Adrian, did you have a comment about that?
Yes, that happens often. Sometimes people are placed in a shelter, and then they happen to use wherever they prefer to get their actual mail. So we always have residence addresses, and then on the separate box, a mailing address.
Correct.
Yeah, and I honestly, I think part of the purpose of this asking, if you'll note, there's question 8 is the address where you live, and question 9 is the address where you receive mail. And so my understanding is that the address where you live is the address that would be used to determine what your election district is, and where, and therefore determine what your polling location is. So for example, if you're a student and you live in White Plains with your parents, but in the fall you plan to go to school, say in New Paltz, then the address where you currently live, and if it's where you want to vote, is here in White Plains. But if you live in New Paltz and you want the Board of Elections to tell you about elections and you want to get that information in a timely manner, you'd say, send me my mail to New Paltz. But they would come home to White Plains, they would have to come home to White Plains to vote. This is kind of one of the aspects of this that gets a little confusing, because what we have often found when we register students in colleges, or rather in high schools, and perhaps even also in colleges, is that if they're living away from home, but they think they want to go home to vote on election day, then they would enter their home address in item 8, and then they wouldn't fill out, and then they might fill out item 9 just because they want to be reminded. If they choose to vote in New Paltz, for some reason they think they want to do that, then they would fill out item 8 as this is where I'm living, and not fill out 9 because they're going to get mail where they're living. Does that make sense? It's a little bit of a nuance, but that's kind of the way this works.
So Stephen, I'm thinking of the homeless person using number 8 to say the bridge at Park Avenue, whatever, all right? And where they receive the mail could be that relative or whoever it is
Right.
that Adrian and Awilda were talking about,
Right.
you know, someone who gets their mail and they can check in with that person, you know, that mail receiver. So that's how I see 8 and 9 for somebody who is homeless or
Homeless.
shelter, or, you know, or who moves around.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. I would think that that's a pretty reasonable expectation. Yeah.
So,
I would
Stephen,
say
if I
so.
could just clarify, so if you're at the table registering people, we have in a binder, there's a brochure on college students, how to handle college students, and there's also for homeless individuals. So there's more detail in here. Since you asked the question about the homeless individual, it's addressed specifically in here. You should enter the location of where you stay at night, which can be a street corner, a park, a shelter, a bus station, or any other location. This address will be used by the Board of Elections to assign you to the appropriate polling location. In addition, you must provide a mailing address so that voter notification cards and other election materials may be sent to you. And so then here they suggest it could be a local advocacy organization, a shelter, an outreach center, or anywhere else willing to accept mail on your behalf. So it could be a relative, you know, family member is willing to take the mail from the Board of Elections, but that's not necessarily what would be the appropriate polling place. It wouldn't be necessarily be based on that address. The polling place would be based on where the person sleeps.
Just a quick question, and I don't want to keep, you know, going on the homeless thing, but a lot of them move even from town to town. I just want to make sure I give them the right information. So if they're temporarily in, say, in White Plains, right? However, but sometimes go to Yonkers to stay in Yonkers, would I advise them that if they change their location to advise the Board of Elections, or just kind of leave it alone and just go with what they initially put on the form? Do you know what I mean? At least in my
Yeah,
experience.
no, I know. It's
They move from month to month, week to week. It's very
Yeah.
rare during the same location. And I would love them to have the opportunity to vote So as I'm explaining to them how to fill it out, I would like to at least let them know how to proceed if they choose to advise the Board of Elections that they would be relocating, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, the challenge with that is that, I mean, one of the many things that occurs to me in response to that is that there are also these deadlines, you know, so if they move and, you know, if they're living a certain place, or they're you know, they're hanging their hat someplace metaphorically, you know, and then the deadline for changing your registration passes, and they send somebody to that, you know, they send a change of address to the Board of Elections. The Board of Elections are going to say, okay, this is fine, and it'll be effective for the next election and not this one. So it's a, you know, it's a little, I mean, it kind of gets a little mind-boggling with all of this.
Understandably so, I get it.
Yeah. So let me just suggest that, you know, now you've started me. So now we're just gonna have to think about this a little bit. And I mean, I think probably the best thing to do is to encourage folks who are homeless to just kind of keep in mind that, try to remember, you know, that they, even though they're moving around, that when they did register, they registered at this location, that's really where they need to think about, you know, the launching point, the jumping off point for voting. I mean, that's the best I can do with this. I think it's really a challenge. Okay, so I don't want to cut this off, but let's continue. And if there are more questions about this, we can circle back at the end. We've done a lot of, we've said a lot about this, about the registering, about the address versus where you receive your mail. And I confess, you know, at any rate, that it's somewhat straightforward with students. It's less obvious when one is dealing with the homeless population. And also the other thing I will point out is that someone may live in a house where the mail is delivered and collected from a PO box. So here again, the requirement for item 8 is that the address at which the person resides is entered in item 8. And in item 9, it's simply where should the Board of Elections send any mail that it wants to, any notifications that it wants the voter to be aware of. Okay, so items 10, 11, and 12, these two lines are really sort of related. If it's a first-time registrant, then the answer to the question, have you voted before, is no. Now, you will recall at the beginning of this presentation, I said that the voter registration form can be used for other purposes, and this is where that comes into play. If an individual wishes to register under a new name, a new address, or change the county in which they reside, or the state in which they resided, or they wish to change their party affiliation, this is the starting point for that. So someone comes up to you and says, hey, I used to live in White Plains, then I got an apartment in Hartsdale. What do I do? Well, the answer to that question is you go to item 10, you fill all this stuff out and you go on, but in item 10, you say, have you voted before? And the answer to that question is, hopefully, if they're a registered voter, the answer to that question is, yes, I have voted before. And then they proceed to say, my address was this. And above here, they have said what their address is now. So that was it. again, if they come to you and they say, you know, I really feel like I can make more of a difference if I have the ability to vote in the primaries, then you say, okay, that's fine. And then we're going to go down here to item 14, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But is that clear what this is all about? That it's no, if you haven't voted before, that's pretty straightforward. If you have voted before, then you say yes. And as far as if they scratch their heads and they say, geez, I don't remember what year I voted before, then don't worry about it. Again, this is probably one of those items that the Board of Elections is equipped to deal with. I'm sorry, the only thing I'm doing here as I'm doing this is I'm making sure that people are joining us as we speak. So I just want to keep an eye on that. All right, so that's item 10 and 11 and 12. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay. Now, this next one, identification, this is this is something that more often than not, with students, we find that they either don't have a driver's license yet. They might perhaps have they might have a learner's permit, or if they have a driver's license, they don't have it on them. They sure as hell, in many cases, in my experience, don't have any idea what their social security number is. So this does not disqualify for them this does not disqualify them from registering to vote. They can simply, if they scratch their heads, they say, or any person who scratches their head and say, gee, I don't have my license with me, I don't remember my social security number, and I don't know how many people in this world actually carry their social security cards with them anymore, so some people may not remember it. If they don't have either one of those, this is what happens. The Board of Elections, and I'm going to go back up to the top of this form, because the information about how this is handled is in this section here. And it says, we'll try to check your identity before Election Day through the DMV driver's license number or non-driver ID number, or the last 4 digits of your social security number, which you'll fill in below. Okay, so if they don't have that, if you do not have a DMV or social security number, you may use a valid photo ID, a current utility, a bank statement, a paycheck, a government check, or some other government document that shows your name and address. You may, now this says if you're mailing it in, you may include a copy of these types of ID with the form. And this is the important one because we're going to collect the form from them. If we are unable to verify your identity before Election Day, you will be asked for ID when you vote for the first time. So really what I think in essence, what you want to tell them is that, they should make a note and be prepared to bring one of these things. A photo ID, for example, if they're a student, they might have a student photo ID, or they might have a driver's license that has a photo ID. If they're living someplace and they're paying and they have utility bills, they can do that. Okay, so the point here is that if you don't have a DMV number or you don't have a social security number, there are other means of providing ID, and you have to do that when you go to vote. So you have to show that. Now, I have a feeling that a question is going to come up about the homeless because, and I'm going to ask this, I'm going to show my ignorance here. What happens with the homeless? Do the homeless typically have some form of ID that they'll be able to show? I mean, how would that work?
Yes, they have, most of them have benefit cards. Unfortunately, the benefit cards do not always have their picture.
Okay.
It has their name and their client ID number.
Okay.
Those come from Albany. They used to have the picture on it, but most of the time, They do not have a picture any longer.
Yeah.
Some do not.
And in my experience, they typically do not have ID because they don't always necessarily go through the social services process.
That's true too.
Them have lost, when they lose their home, lose all their documents. So
Mhm.
typically we have to assist them with getting a new car, social security card, a new everything, birth certificate. We typically have to try to help them go through that process. That's not always, but that's a large portion of the population that I deal with.
Okay, yeah, Barbara?
It says that if they will accept the first time that you vote, a bank statement or utility bill, it doesn't sound like a photo is required. So I would think a government issued benefits card is probably better documentation than what some other people might be bringing, even if it doesn't have a picture on it.
Yeah, I would, the same thought occurred to me, Barbara. I think that's true. As long as it's something that shows the name of the individual and as it says here, a government ID. See, that's what it says here. Someplace here, it says something about government ID. Yeah, Cora.
No question. So if for utility bills, it's different from a government ID. A lot of people now just have a cell phone. The cell phone invoice, I think it's called, really just has a name, the person's name, I believe, and something that shows that they're paying this phone bill. So I wonder what we can glean from that.
You know something, there are a lot of nuances to this, but I'm gonna guess in this day and age that there are any number, I mean, you know, look, I don't know, you know, I can't answer all of these questions. I mean, I think these are
No,
things
just something to
perhaps
think
that-
about, because it's gonna
Yeah,
come
there's
up.
certainly things to think about.
Yeah.
But my recommendation would be that, and this is not to pass the buck or anything, but my recommendation would be to encourage folks to simply indicate that at this time, at the time of registration, they do not have a New York State driver's license or social security number, and then encourage them when they go to the polls to bring with them some form of ID, whatever it is, and that they deal with that at that point. I honestly don't think that this is not an adversarial relationship. And I honestly believe my experience over the many, many years that I voted is that the folks that with the exception of the one poll worker who scolded me the last time I went, that when I was 18 years old, which is many, many years ago, I signed my name Stephen P. Cohen, and I have since dropped the P and I signed it Stephen Cohen, and she scolded me because I didn't use the P. With the exception of that, I have never had an issue with, and my handwriting, as I'm sure all of yours, does not look anything like it did when I was 18 years old and I signed it. And they have never said to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Cohen, your signatures don't match." And it's not because they're encouraging fraud. It's just because they understand that this is a process that we want to encourage people to participate in. So I'm gonna say that overall, I think that the poll workers, and by the way, at worst, what a poll worker will do if they know the ropes is that they will issue a provisional ballot. So they will say, okay, we're not quite sure that this person is registered or that everything checks out, but we're not going to tell you you can't vote. We're going to issue you a provisional ballot, which means you can vote. We're going to send it to the Board of Elections. The Board of Elections will validate it, and then that will be counted. Okay, and that's a pretty standard process, by the way. If you get to a polling place and for some reason they can't find your information or there's other stuff, and you think you have a right to vote, you have every right to say, I would like to have a provisional ballot, which you can fill out and hand to them, and then subsequently the Board of Elections will deal with that. Okay, so there, I mean, again, as I say, that's, I think, the way to handle these things. But you can see that this seemingly straightforward form is anything but straightforward, that there are dozens of nuances to this, you know, and it's a challenge. Okay, so any questions so far before I move to the last part? Okay, so the last part of this form is has to do here with political parties. Now, political parties, again, a registrant does not have to select a political party. However, you should remind them that, or just not necessarily remind them, but just tell them that in New York State, if a voter wishes to vote in a party primary, a Democratic primary, a Republican primary, a Conservative Party primary, whatever primary, that individual, that voter must be a registered member of that political party. And that's what this section is all about. Okay, so, and by the way, also, if there are instances where a voter would like to go from no party to select a party, or would like to change their registration, this is where they do that. It's pretty straightforward, but any questions about it before I move on? Okay, now before I go to 16, let me just point this out. This one about an absentee ballot, this is in one sense, you get the get out of jail free card. If you don't quite know where you're going to be on election day, you can ask for an absentee ballot, and they'll send you, I believe, I'm not sure whether they send you a form to request an absentee ballot. I believe that that's what they do, and then you have to validate that you're not going to be in the place where you're registered to vote, and so on and so forth. So you can request an absentee ballot. One thing I want to just tell all of you, which is important, is that the rules this year, and this I thank my colleague Barbara Shore for pointing out, is that the rules for requesting an absentee ballot this year are not the same as they were in the past 2 years. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that they've gone back to the original rules, which, oh no, wait, I take that back. The rules for requesting an absentee ballot are the same as they've been in the past 2 years, right? About COVID restrictions, and that's fine. However, if one requests an absentee ballot, one must vote by absentee ballot. A voter may not request an absentee ballot and then go to the polls and say, I don't want to use the absentee ballot. Barbara's going to correct me on this.
No, you can go to the polls, it says, and do an affidavit ballot, but it's going to be held aside. And if they have your absentee ballot, that will prevail. If for some reason they don't find your absentee ballot, then they will accept. So they won't turn you away, but it doesn't automatically supersede the absentee ballot, which is the big difference from last year.
Yeah, Diane, you're on mute, but go ahead.
But I think I want to distinguish between applying for an absentee ballot and actually completing and returning an absentee ballot. Barbara, wouldn't that be correct? So you can apply for an absentee ballot, but not use it. As opposed to.
That's, yes, you can request it and you can file the affidavit and they're going to check. And if you actually filed the absentee ballot,
Right.
it's going to prevail, not just that
Right.
if you requested it, but if you filed it.
Yeah, and to Diane's point about requesting, the rules for requesting, the circumstances under which one may request an absentee ballot are the same as they were for the last 2 years with regard to COVID. Is that correct?
Correct. That the governor signed something that allows an automatic, if you say it's COVID, for this coming election.
Okay, so that's important. So the two, again, this is another thing. This is all very complicated, right? One must apply for an absentee ballot, and one must give a reason why they want why that individual wants an absentee ballot. This time around, COVID is a valid reason for requesting an absentee ballot. When one receives an absentee ballot, one may fill it out and mail it back, or if that voter wishes, that voter may go to the polling place and say, I would like to vote in person, or I don't know. There are different nuances to it. And I'm not going to try to rehash what Barbara said, but the thing is that it's changed this year. So, just people have to just be aware of that. And I wouldn't get into a lot of that detail if you don't have to. And then the other thing is that the Board of Elections really needs poll workers. They really need folks to sit at the polls and do the work of signing people in. So if you have someone, if when you register an individual, you might want to encourage them to do that. So we've now probably confused you thoroughly about all of this, and there is a lot to be, I mean, it's unfortunate because it really is, it really is there are a lot of if, then, do this, or else do that kinds of conditions with this. And it's challenging because there's a single form that we need to use to do all of these things. Yeah, Adrian, you had a comment?
Yes. Does the binder or this information, were we going to get that the day of?
Yeah. We in fact, I'm going to go through this last bit, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to talk about the binder and what's in the binder. The last two things I want to say, and you've all been very patient, so I thank you all. The last two things I want to say. Oh, and by the way, I just want to go back and point one thing out. Up here, this thing about county, I cannot tell you how many times I've had individuals say, I live in White Plains, and then when they enter their county, they enter White Plains. Okay, it really is unbelievable how many folks are not quite sure what the county is that they live in. Okay, and again, if folks are coming up from New York City, I mean, there's Bronx County, there's
Manhattan.
Kings County, Manhattan, Staten Island. So and Brooklyn is particularly challenging because it's not Brooklyn County, it's Kings County, right? So the thing is that just when you and I encourage you, when they complete the form, they must complete it. You may not write anything in on the form because that could potentially invalidate it. So you must make sure that they fill it all out. And if they fill this out incorrectly, then they need to cross it out and write it in themselves. So I just want to point that out. Last but not least, make sure they sign the form and date the form. Okay. All right, good. In the few minutes, so any questions about the form? I mean, if your heads are not spinning now, then you're equipped to register voters. Yeah, Diane?
Stephen, you said that we would be collecting the voter registration forms and submitting them as a group to the Board of Elections.
Yes.
I know that when I handled National Voter Registration Day with Barbara this year, there were people who did not want to give us the forms because there's personal information on here and they were leery of how it would be handled. They wanted to complete it and fill it out, and send it in themselves. And you didn't do the back of the form, but the back of the form has the address, where to mail it, it needs a stamp, or it can be dropped off at the Board of Elections. So if they don't, if they know their county, which hopefully they'll know it's Westchester, the address is on the back of the form. And they would just have to complete it and either in person drop it off or put it in the mail.
Right, and this is what I'm showing. I think you can see that on the screen. That's right. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah,
there seemed to be a sensitivity to leaving confidential information with us.
Okay, and that's fair enough. I mean, in this day and age.
It's fine.
All right, good. So before we move away from this, are there any questions about the form itself? And by the way, let me just say that you know, if you have questions about this, feel free to contact me. LWVWP.president@gmail.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions that I can, or if I can't, you know, and the other thing, by the way, is just encourage people to contact the Board of Elections if they're really confused about any of this. So at that point, I'm going to turn this over. Who's going to, Diane?
Why don't I quickly go
Barbara?
through the resources and then
Sure.
Diane can mention what's
Okay.
in the binder,
All
because we
right,
only
good. I'm
have a
gonna
few
stop
minutes
sharing.
left.
Okay, go ahead.
So at each table, you know, again, if it's a short-term event and you may be the only group there, you may be the ones putting the information out, like Juneteenth Day, you could be going and the stuff is laid out already, but there's going to be a bag of goodies. It's going to include a vinyl banner with tape to go on the front of the table. There's going to be pens and hand sanitizer. There's going to be name tags. There is going to be piles of both voter registration forms in English and Spanish, and applications for absentee ballots in English and Spanish. There's going to be a pile of the small card put out by the League of Women Voters called a voter's guide, which are available for people to take away with them. It has a bunch of information on it. There's also going to be a pile of postcards that the League put together, the back of which unfortunately just mentioned the June primary and the general election date. And now, because of all the confusion with the redistricting, there's also going to be an August primary date for certain elections, but that may be way too complicated to get into. But the front of the card would be very helpful because it mentions vote411.org, which is the League's website, and it's going to have the QR code for that website. And we've even seen it work when I was in high school doing registration a few weeks ago. If someone isn't sure whether they're registered or wants to check anything, by going to this website and putting in their address, they will find out a ton of information. So these are little cards that will be available for people to take also. So pretty much, yeah, again, these are going to be the supplies to hand out. There's going to be clipboards for people to write on. I might not have remembered everything, but they're fairly self-evident. And then the resources for those of us at the table to like reference if we get questions that we might be able to get more information on are going to be in this loose leaf binder that Diane put together, and she can speak to that. Does anyone have any question about what I just said, rambling through?
No, you did a great job. I just have a quick question.
Sure.
You did say a couple of the dates, and I am aware of the June primary and the August primary, but do you have the specific dates just so that I could have that information and share that
On the
information?
back of the card is listed the June primary date and the early voting dates for it.
No, I'm asking you to give me now if you have it.
Oh, I don't have the August.
I have it.
date.
I have the
Would be
information.
great.
Okay,
Thank
Yeah,
you.
so the early voting for the first primary will be June 18th to 26th. And the actual primary election in June is June 28th. I don't know about early voting for the August one. So much is still up in the air around that, but
This is a start. So
yeah, hopefully we'll have that information.
I think
And
the
for
primary
general-
day in August is the 23rd, but again, I don't know what the
I don't know the
early
early
voting
voting.
dates may be.
Yeah, I don't know the early voting dates. The general election, October 29th through November 6th is early voting. And then the general election is on November 8th.
Yeah, you know, maybe what we'll do, Tubman team, League Tubman team, is I'll collect, you give me those dates that we know and I'll send an email to all the registrants just to make
Okay,
sure
they're
that
on the back of the
everybody's got it.
postcard.
Yeah, I know, but just in addition, you know,
Yeah.
belt and suspenders. Let's just do that.
Mhm.
We have
Before,
folks report to in our organizations that we want to be able to provide them with information in advance.
yeah, sure. Okay. And Diane, can I just take 30 seconds? I'm going to run over just a little bit, but I just want to take 30 seconds and do one thing. Barbara talked about vote 411. I just want to show vote 411 if I may. So this screen that you're seeing now is vote 411. All right, this is a very useful page. And as Barbara said, there is first of all, it's vote411.org, which is simple to remember. But as she also mentioned, there's a QR code on the postcards, and there will be, and in other places that will take them to this location. What's useful about this, and we had this happen to us at some of the high schools where we were recently, is that we've had students come up to us and say, gee, I don't know, I think when I filled out the
DMV form and they verified that it
that's
was
right,
accepted.
they were able to go here, select a state, and find out if they were registered to vote. By the way, also, this form, this website allows you to find out what's on your particular ballot and how the candidates feel on things. So Vote 411 is a real gold mine of information, and my colleagues have worked very hard to get all this stuff in order. So I encourage you to keep this in mind. So with that, I'm gonna go back and let Diane take up the baton now.
You're not going to remember this, but this binder's going to be at the registration table. So it's, it's going to have all the resources, and this is stuff not to give away. The things to give away to people are the resources that Barbara mentioned, but in here will be at least one copy of all the things we've talked about. So we have, we'll have the voter registration forms in Spanish and English. We have information that's from the league, which is a voter guide for the election, and it has some of the highlights on where do I vote, how do I register, etc. We have first vote. So if it's a person's first vote, there's a whole brochure on that. I wanted to point out the card that Barbara was talking about, and it hit, I don't know if it'll actually pick up on my screen, but you can see there's a QR code on it, and that's what we're talking about. There'll be giveaways on this, and this has the primary election day and the regular election day. We may be using these to mail to people to remind them to vote. And we had talked about some specialized brochures for situations like college students, homeless, individuals with criminal convictions or detained in jail or prison, and individuals with disabilities. So there are separate brochures. If any of those situations occur and you want to read more, you can do it while you're there. We had put in the maps for the districts, but I think I'm going to pull those out of the book because who knows what the districts are. There's information about absentee voting, what your qualifications would be, how to apply, and again, what the dates are, and their actual forms in both English and Spanish to apply for an absentee ballot. We were also including information about the league if anybody is motivated to join the league based on the resources that we provide. You also have an opportunity to hand the materials on that. That's it.
Thank you very much. Any questions about that? Now, I have one last thing. One thing I will say is that if you like the work that the league does and you want to join us and find out more about the league and work with us, then LWVWP.org is our website. The last thing I want to tell you about, so that's LWVWP.org. The last thing I want to tell you about, and I'm going to put this in the chat room, is that on June 2nd, we will be holding an evening Zoom meeting beginning at 7 p.m. hosted by the League, and it will feature former state legislator David Buchwald, who will be talking to us a little bit about redistricting and what that means for White Plains. So June 2nd is what?
Thursday.
3
Thursday.
weeks away. Hopefully by June 2nd, we will have a little bit more clarity. But I posted in the chat a link to register for that event. And I think with your permission, I will take the email addresses of all the folks who registered for this call tonight and add that to our email distribution list. And you will then all receive a flyer, basically, an electronic flyer about this. And you might want to disseminate that far and wide. And, you know, David's pretty knowledgeable about this stuff. And so that might be a good event for you to try to attend. Again, that's June 2nd at 7 p.m. And I will actually also put some information about it up on our website. I'll try to do that tomorrow. Does the binder mention the deadline for changes needed prior? Oh, you mean as in what the deadlines are for registration or address change and that sort of thing?
If someone needs to change their last name or
Right,
address,
okay.
right,
Yeah,
and
Diane,
they
is that?
already registered?
Sure, that's actually a very important question.
Yes, and
I think the short answer to that
Yeah.
question
Yeah.
is, Diane, is yes. It
yes,
will.
yes, it does. I had to look up the dates though myself because I don't know them.
Yeah,
But we do-
I had
that's very important.
prepared a one-page calendar and then we sort of stopped using it
It's-
because we were just focusing. Are they on the card?
They're on the card, these
Perfect.
cards, yeah.
Yeah, and we're gonna be we're gonna have cards to hand out to people and stuff, so.
Those are takeaways.
Yeah,
These
and
are take-
also,
yeah.
there will, to the best of my knowledge, there will be at least one League person at every event at all times. So we'll be all there, but you'll all do great. And, you know, I just think, you know, you should, the one last thing I do want to say, and this is something that it took me a while to learn myself. And to the rest of you, you'll probably all go, oh yeah, sure, that's obvious. I encourage you all to encourage people to register to vote or to come to the table to get information about, you know, where to register or other things like that, or where to vote and things like that. Do not, however, ask anybody why they don't want to register to vote. You know, do not say to them, really? You don't want to register to vote? Are you a citizen? How come you don't want to register to vote? You're a citizen. Why don't you want to register to vote? That is just simply,
No.
yeah, it's an invasion of privacy. It's, I mean, and there are many, many reasons why people don't want to do that. So it's, you know, I confess it's something that took me a little while to really become sensitive to, but it's something that I like to try to remind people of. Okay, any questions before we adjourn? For those folks who joined late, I have been recording this event, and I will put it up on our YouTube channel so you can review any of it. I will also send out a copy of the annotated form, which will be in the binder. So just so you have all that. So thank you all very much. Thank you all very much for your support and participation in this. And I look forward to meeting all of you at the upcoming events. So you all have a pleasant evening now. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.